Yesterday I did get a couple of text messages and emails from people who are not able to log in. So I hope all of those issues were solved. And if you do have any more questions, please reach out to us. Both Swinny and I are, we've replied pretty quickly. If there is a little bit of a delay, please don't feel bad. It's just sometimes we do get a little busy. So we're just going to wait maybe a couple more minutes before we get started with today. All right. Before we get started with today, I was talking to Swinny, and there's, I think, one person that I really want to thank. I hope she's here with us today, and if she is, then I would love for her to, show her video and unmute herself. But Mukta ma'am is the head of legal and HR at Lumos Learning, and she's, helped us through the entire process, made sure that we get things done on time, been on our back, and both of us are a little lazy, so she's made sure that we stay on top of things. And I really want to thank her for all of her input, making sure that we get all of our work done. And without her, this would have not have been possible. So, Mukta ma'am, if you're here, just a couple of words would be really nice. Okay, I guess she's not here, so I will text her later and she can talk to us at the end of the session today. So good evening once again, and thank you so much for coming back and joining us for day 2 of this workshop. I hope you all found yesterday to be informative, and I can't wait to get started with today because I feel like today is where the actual work begins, and we'll get down to things that really, really make a difference in your preparation for mediation competitions. Where's the present? All right, Swinny, you want to take it away?
Sure. Hi, everyone. We're so happy that you're joining us again today in large numbers, and that is amazing to see you guys here. So today, basically, yesterday was a introduction session where we just told you about what is mediation and the very basics of it. And today we're going to dive in a little bit deeper. I remember yesterday we had quite a couple of questions which were like, do we need to read books, and what is the importance of theory and everything? And hopefully after today's class, you won't be needing too many books, and we can cover as much theory as possible. The main goal of today is to prepare you what happens before the competition session, which means how to read a problem. And trust me, that is just as important as what you do in an actual session at the table in the competition, because one of the parts of getting into your preparatory stage is drafting the mediation plan. And that mediation plan has a lot of different components, which eventually helps you in your actual session. And it's something you always keep at the back of your mind when you are negotiating and mediating at the table. So it's quite important that you pay attention today. You not only take away marks for your mediation plan, but also how you apply whatever you learned today in your competition. So to make sure that we're not focusing too much on theory, and you also learn that how to apply this theory in your session and how to actually solve a problem or write up a mediation plan, we're doing something called how to read a problem as well. And I hope you guys read a problem which I sent to you yesterday, which is called the N-class problem. And if you haven't, we'll get into it quickly. But before we dive into that, I would just want to go quickly into mediation approaches. So this is important to understand because these are the different kinds of outcomes which you get after adopting different kinds of approaches. So as you can see on screen, we have four different approaches. Now, first is the lose-lose mediation approach. Now, that means quite true to its title itself. It means that all parties end up leaving the table worse off than they started. This negotiation approach is normally followed when people usually feel very threatened that the other party is just going to take away whatever they have. They want to ensure that the outcome of the negotiation is not suitable to the interests of the other party. And that goes again, vice versa. So this type of situation arises when negotiating partners ignore one another's needs and they try to hurt each other as much as possible. And it's kind of obviously not preferred at any table. Why even go to a mediation if you are very reluctant to use the process as in itself? That's why you then think about something called the win-lose approach. Now, this is kind of a competitive approach. It is also known as distributive mediation. If you're in your first year of law school or even second year, you might have heard the term zero-sum game. So that's what happens in most of the litigations and arbitrations, that one person takes it all, the other person doesn't get anything. It's an order which the court gives or the arbitral tribunal gives, that this is what the other one party wins and the other party loses. And that can in fact happen in a mediation, that one party takes away everything. It's where you use a fixed set of resources, that you have a fixed set of solutions or options, and you split it into two and say, even if you don't split it, you're just like, okay, I'm going to keep my half of this, and you might as well just walk away from this mediation session with nothing at all. And it's kind of the distributive bargaining process, and it's the principle of competition which is usually applied over here. And it's very less likely that you will accept such an outcome voluntarily, and therefore you try to instead maximize as much as you have. And that then brings me to the third approach, which is the compromise approach. Now, this approach is slightly an improvement over the lose-lose approach as the first one. To avoid a lose-lose situation, you just give up a part of what you already have. You're just like, okay, we need to get at least something out of this mediation. I might as well give up this position of mine or this demand of mine to get at least something in return. And you're just like, I want to walk away with at least something in my hand. So you split whatever you have, whatever solution or whatever resource you have, you split it into two, and you say that this is what we're going to get. This is how we're going to compromise in a situation. Quite true to its word. The final approach is the win-win approach, and also known as the integrative mediation. Now, this is the most collaborative approaches of all. And most of the mediation competitions look for you adopting the win-win approach. The main goal of this approach is to create value, to generate value as much as possible. And it's superior to all the other negotiation approaches because it leaves the parties feeling that they had something to win out of this mediation. You walk away with, okay, we got something nice, and both the parties should feel that way. And you shouldn't have to give up anything like in the compromise approach. The main concern here is to maximize the joint outcomes. And the dominant strategies is cooperation, sharing information, and mutual problem solving. And these are the words you will normally hear in your mediation sessions, your judges telling that the same to you in your feedback or even your opening statements. Now, if you feel that I've said a lot of words over here which you don't understand and we haven't gotten deeper into, I'm pretty sure you will understand these different approaches by the end of this session, because this is the very only outcome of the different mediation approaches. But how to get to the win-win outcome is what we're going to learn next. But before we go into how to go into win-win approaches, I just want to quickly go over the problem which I had sent you earlier, and I hope everybody has read it. But if not, then do not worry, we're just doing a quick recap of it. So it's a problem called Panem versus Genovia. Um, the brief facts of the problem are as follows. So you have two countries over here. One is Panem and the other one is Genovia. Now, Panem is an aquaculture based economy and they are experts in shrimp. So they have been exporting shrimp to Genovia, and Genovia is one of their largest importers. Um, and Genovia has shrimp needs to quite an extent that they have this extremely famous dish called the shrimp soup, and it is quite famous among the tourists. But what happens is Genovia suddenly faces a typhoid outbreak. Now, the reason for this typhoid outbreak at the very outset is thought to be the shrimps which were imported from Panem. And even though the investigation was still underway and you still don't know what is the exact reason, um, what happens is that people in Genovia and the tourists as well, they start thinking that shrimp is the reason. And Genovia bans all import of shrimp from Panem. And this leads to a major diplomatic crisis for Panem. It faces a severe financial crisis, not only from Genovia, but also in the international market, because the word has spread around that Genovia has this typhoid outbreak because of the shrimp. So all the other countries also do not want to import shrimp from Panem. The reason why they found out that this particular typhoid outbreak is because of the shrimp is that when you export the shrimp from the Panem port to the Genovian port, the shrimp is poured into big tankers in the ships. And these tankers have a lot of water in them, which during the journey of, say, a week long journey, the water is flushed in and out. And once it reaches the Genovian port, the water is again switched in the shrimp tanks, and these shrimps are tested. Now, these shrimps tested for a lot of fecal matter, but not the virus. Now, as we know, that typhoid usually spreads through feces or through contaminated water and food. And that's why they thought shrimp containing this fecal matter might be the reason for the typhoid outbreak. But there was no virus. Let's keep that in mind. So those are the common information which is known to the mediator, the client, and the counsel of both the parties, which is Panem and Genovia. Now, this is the common information, the brief facts, which has led to the problem where Panem has requested that they want to mediate this issue and they want to resolve this issue by mutually, so that they do not have to create a international drama out of it. And they are trying to resolve the issue. But what we also have in any competition is something called a confidential information. Now, this confidential information is only available to the team, that is the client and the counsel of one side. So say if we have confidential information for Panem, that will only be known to the Panem's client and counsel and not to Genovia nor the mediator. And same goes for Genovia. And I believe that Vivek will be taking on from here to explain what is this confidential information for Panem and Genovia.
Thanks, Winnie. So in this particular situation, Panem has very, easy points for us to understand. They need to resume the export of shrimp. At least 50% of their export needs to get back on track. They need to test their shrimp tested for fecal matter and not for the virus. So you need to be careful at what point you reveal this information, whether you reveal it just to the mediator or to both the parties. Of course, this is a contextual issue, and you have to decide before what kind of strategy you're going to assume in terms of whether you're going to go for positional bargaining or for an interest-based bargaining. Now, the third fact for Panem would be the fact that they're willing to exchange health data. So in that case, interest-based bargaining would be a little bit better because you're looking towards the why are we dealing with this kind of infection, whether or not the source of the typhoid was the fecal matter or whether it was something else. Now, you also want to expand into the cotton industry if you are in Panem. This is mostly because, of course, the shrimp industry is falling and you need to diversify your sources of income to ensure that the economy doesn't completely flatline. These four things can be considered to be your interests. They're not exactly your positions because, or in this case, your expanding to the cotton industry would be a position. The interest would be to ensure that your economy does not flatline and you diversify your sources of income. Willing to exchange health data would be your position, and your interest would be to figure out exactly what is the source of the typhoid. So this is how you have to start reading your confidential information. You can't just read it as one sentence and move on. You need to understand exactly what that piece of information means to you. For Genovia, they want to resume their imports from shrimp. I'm sorry, that says exports. They want to resume their imports of shrimp. They want to make sure that the contaminated drinking water, which tested for typhoid, is not the main source of the contamination of the shrimp itself. They need to get medical assistance to contain the virus, and they also need to keep in mind that they have a fashion week coming up. They have a need for cotton to supply to this fashion week. So these are the 4 different points that they have there. Now, if you think about the whether or not this is a position or interest, fashion week is their interest. Their position would be that they want cotton. If they need medical assistance, which is their position, their interest in that would be to contain the virus and make sure that the typhoid is not spreading. The same would go for contaminated drinking water testing for virus. So in that case, something happened over there. All right, sorry, my train of thought got cut off. I'm not exactly sure what that mark is, but we'll just move on and ignore it. So this is essentially what I was talking about, identifying the different elements in your position paper and what exactly each piece of information means to you. So your goals and objectives would probably be where you want to end up at the end of the entire mediation, whether you want to have, so in this specific scenario, if we just go back to the confidential, we can see here that your goal is to help build back the economy as well as expand into the cotton industry. Broadly, if you're from Penang, you have those 2 goals or objectives. If you're part of Genovia, then you have the 2 goals of restoring your imports, ensuring that you contain the virus, and preparing for a fashion week. So these are your 3 objectives if you're part of Penang. If you're part of Genovia, sorry, my mistake. Now, in terms of identifying your positions and interests, like I was talking about before, you need to make sure that you look at why you want something, which is your interest, and then you look at what you want because of this reason. That's your position. So for example, you would want the expansion into the cotton industry to ensure that your economy has diversified sources of income. So that's the why. So what do you want? You want to set up some kind of agreement between Genovia and Penang where you can source that kind of cotton to them at a particular rate. Now, the strategy that you have, this has more to do with when you release some kind of information or when you talk about some particular confidential information that's been given to you. So let's say you need to release the information that the contaminated water was the reason for the typhoid outbreak. At what point do you want to do that? And how do you want that to affect this conversation? The way you decide this is by ensuring that your priorities are set right in the agenda making stage itself. So if you discuss this initially, then you can figure out the source of the typhoid and your conversation will flow from there rather than discussing a bunch of other different points that don't have a lot to do, like the facts of the case or whether you're trying to figure out what kind of relationship can be brought in terms of expanding the cotton industry. If all of this is discussed before the source of the typhoid outbreak is made clear, then you're just going to be, jumbling up things towards the end and your discussion will become very chaotic. So that's what we mean when we talk about strategy. Now, Batna and Watna. Batna is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement and Watna is your worst alternative to a negotiated agreement. You have to consider your alternatives before going into a mediation, because when you're negotiating, when there are two parties at a table, you need to make it clear that you have worked out your other options. In case nothing happens at this mediation table, then we know what we're going to do. And this is probably our best option, and this would be our worst option. Obviously, you have to strategize properly and make sure that you make the other party aware of your alternatives at the right time. Don't put it in your opening statement and say that if we don't have a fruitful conversation today, then this is what we're going to do, or this is what we're going to do. We need to make it come up at a point where you're reaching an impasse and you say that, all right, if you're not going to move at all, then the best alternative for me to would be to do this, or I'd have to do the worst, and this is my alternative. So that's sort of how you use your button and whatnot. The reason that it's included in your position paper is so that the judges get a clear idea that you're aware of realistically what's going to happen if this mediation does not work out. Your ZOPA is your zone of your ZOPA would be your zone of optimal agreement. So you have So you have as many solutions. ZOPA is your zone of possible agreement. My mistake. So ZOPA is essentially you sit down, you look at what's given to you in the general information and what's given to you in your confidential information, and you think about the different possibilities. Would I be able to do Z if a solution is implemented? So we'll go into this in a little bit more detail. From the name itself, you can understand that zone of possible agreement is basically all of the options that you have laid out before your round itself. Responsibility sharing, it's important for you to plan out exactly how you're going to divide the roles between your client and your counsel. I did talk about that earlier on in yesterday's session, and we can get to that a little bit moving forward. So goals and objectives, you need to know what outcome, like I was saying, you need to make sure that your conversation has a clear path and you're not getting confused. Always make sure to see whether these goals and objectives are realistic and not just something that you're saying for the sake of saying. Prioritize these objectives at the agenda making phase. Look at whether this is a tangible or a non-tangible goal, whether you're trying to achieve a particular dynamic in a relationship or whether you're actually trying to get some substantial amount of money. And predict your opponent's goals so that you can figure out what is going to be your common ground. Working out what the other party is coming to the table with is also really important so that you can have the ideal tone of conversation and so that you're not blindsided by anything that they throw at you. Now, for PNEM, the goals and objectives would be to clear their name of the typhoid outbreak, to rebuild their global reputation, to provide medical assistance and expertise in good faith, to stabilize the shrimp industry, to diversify the economic dependence to the cotton industry as well.
All right. So as we learned that goals and objectives is what you're trying to get out of a particular mediation session, is that what do you want at the end of the day? Why are you at the mediation session? What is your final goal? Like, what is the least what you want to get out of it? So if you could go to the previous slide quickly, as we understand that the goals and objectives were basically things like that you want to build your reputation again, that you want to clear your name of the typhoid outbreak, because in your international market, PNEM's name is kind of ruined at this point. So your main goal is somehow build your reputation again. And this can happen when, say, if Genovia restarts the shrimp imports again, that's when maybe there's a tacit message which goes out into the world saying that, okay, if Genovia is taking the shrimps again, then the shrimp might be safe for consumption. And that's why the international market global reputation can actually start building again, and the other countries might start importing shrimp again. And that's why we have these different goals and objectives. And also, since it is a very shrimp industry dependent economy, you are trying to expand into different industries right now, like the cotton industry, so that if any situation like the shrimp thing arises again in the future, you have a backup option and your economy is not entirely dependent on just one industry. So you're trying to diversify. And that's why you're expanding into the cotton industry. And that's why these are few of the goals and objectives of PANEM. Now, I was thinking that if you get an idea of what we are trying to do about goals and objectives here, would any of you be open to talking to us about what do you think are the goals and objectives for Genovia? Okay, somebody asked a question. Wouldn't providing medical assistance be more of a position and not a goal in itself? I assume it would be to help rebuild the relationship with Genovia. Yes, of course, that does make sense that it would actually more of be, yes, it could be in a position. And a lot of the positions and goals and interests do overlap with each other. And I agree with that statement. The reason why we put it in a goal was the reason you exchange medical records with Genovia, and somehow that will give you an added advantage of finding out the real cause of the typhoid outbreak. And because of once you find out the real cause of typhoid outbreak, maybe you can rebuild your reputation again. But yes, you are right, Samved, that it can be a position. Does anybody have any answers for what could be a goal and an objective for Genovia? You can speak up or you can just put it in the chat box if you want to.
Looking for the fashion week, like looking forward to the fashion week and get out of the typhoid outbreak. Firstly, out of typhoid outbreak.
Yes, perfect. So that would be, yes, Mudit is also saying the same thing, that one main goal would be the typhoid outbreak. And I believe the confidential information, if you've read carefully, it says that you haven't had a typhoid outbreak since the 1900s. And how to control this typhoid outbreak, you need medical assistance. And from somebody who has that experience in the past, which is, again, PANEM. And then the second goal, as you mentioned, that you have an upcoming fashion week. If the tourism industry is ruined, the fashion week won't work, which is why you again want cotton for the fashion week, which again, that would be another goal. Anything else that you can think of? I heard somebody saying something. Start importing shrimp, medical help, cotton for fashion week, resume the import of shrimps. Yes, that's one of the topmost concerns which we have.
Could I add something?
Sorry?
Could I add something?
Yes, sure, of course.
I think it also says that they would like some reassurance through setting standards for biohazard protection for any sort of future occurrence of this sort of event. So I think that could probably be another goal that they want to achieve with PANAM.
Perfect. That is what I was looking for as well. Yes, we do have that as an important goal, that you want to set very high standards with international regulations in place so that this thing doesn't happen again. So that would be one few of the goals which we have for Genovia. People are saying rebuild relationship, considering that they are the biggest importer. Yes, that would be an important goal. So I understand that everybody's gotten quite a hang of what goals and objectives mean. And I think this gives us a start of going into the next part of our session, which is discussing the positions and interests. I know Vivek gave you a primer of everything and you again might be confused, but now that we've discussed goals and objectives, we can go into positions and interests and identify how different they are from goals and objectives. Vivek, you can take on from here for the theory part.
My favorite. So a position is essentially what you say you want, and your interest is more of why you want it. And I think I've been trying to reiterate this quite a few times. We have one quick question. So when we talk about Bhatna and Watna, what are we talking about best and worst? For me, the responding party, or collectively for both of us. So your Bhatna and Watna needs to be with relation to you. So your best alternative in one situation may be to go to another vendor, while your your worst alternative would be to go to court. Like Sweeney said, we will definitely be coming back to that later. we're kind of running short on time, so I'm going to try and zip through this as quickly as possible. If you have any questions, just unmute yourself instead of asking on the chat group so that I don't have to check in the middle. Now, you also need to understand that positions are sort of surface statements of where a person in an organization wants to go, while the interest is more of the underlying reason, the values, the motivations, things like that. And an example as given there, a union demands a 5-year contract. Why? Because they want job security for an extended period. The other examples that we gave you, we want to expand into the cotton industry, but why do you want to expand in the cotton industry? Because if you do not diversify your incomes, then your economy will flatline. Now for Panem, we can see that the positions here are, I think Swinny will explain them very quickly.
All right, thank you. So as you understand, the position is the very fixed demand which you have, and interest is the why behind that particular demand. So say Panem right now in your config has that you need at least 50% of your shrimp exports. Now you have to think, why do you need this? You need to, firstly, the interest would then be to revive your economy, and second, to rebuild your reputation in the global market, that once Genovia starts taking the shrimp imports, then the other countries will feel comfortable to take shrimp imports again. The second position is that we need to expand the cotton industry. So obviously the reason behind such a strong position would be to reduce the dependence on one shrimp industry or one aquaculture industry, so that you can diversify and such a situation doesn't arise again. And the next you have is you need a minimum sales price at $20,000 for the cotton industry. Now, the reason behind this would be to revive or provide financial security for citizens, but that also means in a way that you're currently facing a lot of losses because of the shrimp imports going down, shrimp exports going down from 100% capacity to 50%. And to somehow make up and go up slowly and rebuild your economy, you need quite a high amount of price for your cotton, which you will be selling. And the last is the long-term contract for cotton industry. So why do you need this? Is because you need to have constant and stable FDI into local economy. You can't have a one-off agreement which says that, okay, we will import cotton for 1 year, and then you rebuild your entire infrastructure for the cotton industry, and the next year you don't have any buyers at all, or the number of buyers reduced significantly. So those are the positions and interests which you identify. And why you need to make this distinction is something which Vivek will explain in the next slide. But for now, let's try and identify the different positions and interests for Genovia. And again, I'm going to ask you guys to pitch in if you guys have any ideas. So try and tell me one position and the corresponding interest for Genovia. Anybody? All right, so securing cotton is what Deb
If you
Malia
guys
says.
could unmute yourself and just talk, that would be really nice.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, Deb Malia, I'm sorry if I said your name wrong, but could you elaborate on cotton, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So Panam want to export cotton and want to get a position in the market, whereas Genova also want to get cotton for his fashion week. So they have a common interest on the ground, I believe.
Yes,
And
that is correct. Having a common ground and common interest is how you move forward in a mediation. You might have different positions on how much cotton you want to import, but having a underlying interest, which is common, that one person wants to export and one person needs imports, is what is important to identify. So that is absolutely correct.
May I speak?
Yes,
Actually,
yes.
I think Soumya had raised her hand before, so if she could just go and then Charu, that's good. That'll be good.
Yeah. So the point where Genovia wants to import, continue the import of shrimps, so that the tourism industry wouldn't collapse, and the soup they could consider selling it again.
That is absolutely correct. That is right. That's a proper position and an interest. We had Charu, you had something to add?
Yes, thank you so much for giving me the chance. Actually, Soumya covered my point, but then again, I would like to say that to contain the outbreak of typhoid first, that would be the position of Genovia, and the interest would be getting medical assistance, because they have a long lasting relationship with Panem of importing the shrimp. So the position of both the countries could be built on that, providing medical assistance.
That is
So
absolutely correct.
hold on. I actually have, I do not believe that is correct, in my
Okay.
opinion. So
Sure.
I think your position would be to get medical assistance, and your interest would be to ensure that the outbreak is contained and that you're building your relationship back through the receiving of medical assistance. Does anyone want to counter that point?
Hi, may I?
Yes.
I think alternatively, controlling the typhoid could be a position, and the interest would be to revive its cotton farming industry, because in the confidential information, it's given that they have expertise in cotton farming, but they're unable to do so because of the typhoid virus.
All right, that is an interesting reading of the confidential information as well. Yes, if they do try to revive the cotton industry, they can somehow fund their own fashion week, but at the same time, they would also have a need to simultaneously seek cotton from Panem while the typhoid outbreak is still going on. So yes, that does make sense. That's a very interesting read of the confidential information.
So I also want to just clarify that what I wasn't trying to correct you, Chadel. I just wanted to say that I have a different opinion. So the way you phrase your positions and interests are not always right or wrong. That's one thing that you need to understand. The judges are going to look at how you phrased it. And if they understand it, if they get what you're trying to convey, then you're good to go. But if your interest in your position does not match, if it's not coherent, that's when you're in trouble. So the aim is to make sure that there's coherency, not so much as accuracy.
Yes.
Manav says Genovia wants a yearly revision of prices. So the interest is the yearly fashion week requires high investment, and hence they would want to make profits on that. Yeah, that actually does make sense. Yearly revision of prices. Yeah, okay, cool. I think that's a little bit more in depth into the problem than what you're truly trying to solve with regards to getting to the source of the breakout of the typhoid epidemic. But the more I read it, I am understanding what you're saying, Manav. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yes, that is a position because that's what is given to them in the confidential information. Once you go in, that would one of the important stances when you take when the cotton issue comes up and you're discussing it. You will be like, no, we want to stick to a yearly revision of prices, and of course, understanding that you do not want to make such a high investment at the very beginning is definitely an interest. All right,
Okay,
so we can move on to the next part, which is. There's another way of looking at interests. You can normally divide it up to economic interests, diplomatic interests, and social interests, which is as simple as the titles themselves. Economic can be to revive the industries. Diplomatic is, of course, rebuilding your reputation in the market, or even developing stronger relations and ties with Panem and Genovia. And social interest can be, again, with the containing the outbreak and bringing tourism back. So there are a lot of ways to classify these interests, and the way you draft them in your mediation plan, if you put it something like this, by classifying into different categories, it kind of makes it interesting to read for the judges, and they understand that you've gotten deep into the problem. So I see that a lot of people have a lot of suggestions about the same, and it's good that you've understood positions and interests. And I guess maybe we can move on to the next part, which is strategies adopted.
So there's actually a question that I think Devmalia Sinha asked, and he wants to know if Panem can ask for an official statement from Genovia stating that shrimps were not the reasons for the outbreak, as they are ready to import shrimps and they now know the real reason of outbreak. Is that possible during mediation realms? So yes, you do have the ability to ask for official statements. You can have a deal saying that we're going to make a joint press release, things like that. But in this, but you need to make sure that you ask for the right statement. one that keeps in mind sentiments of all of the countries involved, of all of the parties involved, and one that will not lead to any kind of future damage for you expanding into the cotton industry, or for Genovia, who has their fashion week coming up.
Yes. The way you can normally ask this for an official statement, rather than asking that it's not the reason, Genovia has it in their confidential information that they do not want to reveal that they are the main culprits behind the whole issue. So you can ask that, okay, can you just put a statement out into the world that the investigation is still underway? And if not taking the blame yourself, the shrimps are definitely not the reason, or we're still looking into the matter. But so far, shrimps are safe to consume. That comes up as a creative solution, actually, which we will be talking about tomorrow as well. I heard somebody had a question.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, Carol.
I had a two-part question. First, can you explain more about the difference between position and interest? And secondly, thinking about the position, I don't know, it would be a position or interest, but thinking about the position of Genovia. So their main industry is affected is tourism, and it is affected due to the typhoid outbreak. So first, if they contain the outbreak, then they are in position to do a fashion week as well as increase the tourism of their country that is based on, that is shrimp soup. So like what would be the position or interest of medical help?
So it depends on how you put it across in the mediation, that if you want, say, if you want medical assistance, like a definitive thing that you are going to put at the table, that we want to set it as an agenda, then it can be a position, and the interest behind it can be that to revive the tourism economy, and also to make sure that the fashion week goes properly. So it can be a position, but sometimes it may not necessarily be a position, because that may just be an additional interest you might have to actually getting rid of the outbreak or actually reviving the shrimp imports. It can be an interest which is attached to one of the other positions. So it depends on how you are looking towards it. It can be both a position and interest, but depends on how you place it and what angle you're looking at the question. The another question is,
Excuse me,
yeah.
ma'am, I had a doubt regarding that the position of Genovia. So, if Genovia wants to like have a fashion week, they are wholly reliable on the fact that they have to contain the virus ultimately. So, like they are reliable on Panem at last. So, in the position of Genovia, like, is it possible that like they are in a demanding position unless the virus cannot be cured or like cannot be contained? They cannot like it's not a viable option to have a fashion week. So I think here the domineering position is of Panem if they want to have them to contain the virus. So am I getting it right or wrong?
There's no right or wrong as such. If you are looking from Panem's perspective, and it depends on what approach you use. So some people can think that Panem is not in the strong position because Panem doesn't know that shrimps are not the reason for the outbreak. So they may think that they are in a vulnerable position, and they may go in very apologetic and say, "We are so sorry that this happened to you, and we're so sorry that if we had any role in the typhoid outbreak," and they may not have a dominating position, which is why they may be okay with sudden reduction of exports from 100% to 50%. But if Genovia thinks that, since Genovia knows that they might be the reason behind the typhoid outbreak, they may go in and say that, feel that they are in a more vulnerable position than Panem. So that depends on the parties themselves and what kind of approach they take and what strategy they take in the mediation, which I believe Vivek will be clarifying a bit better in the next session, which is the strategies adopted. Vivek?
So we really do have to move on, but Soumya's hand has been up for a while, and there's one interesting question in the chat box. I'm going to quickly answer Anshul's question, which is during rounds, what should we put on the table, the position or the interest, or a statement explaining both? So now I feel what we've spoken about so far until now has to do with your position paper. So the way we're explaining things, the way we're asking you to present it is all going to be in a written format that you submit to the judges before your round begins. During the rounds, which is what we're getting to now, whether you want to go through positional type of bargaining, interest-based negotiation, that's sort of what you have to look at during the rounds. Anshul, I hope that answers your question, which basically means to be answered. Soumya, what do you want to talk about?
I think she just
I
forgot to put
forgot to
the
put it
hand
down.
down.
Please
Oh,
continue.
okay. Sure,
Sorry.
sure.
Okay.
All right. So we're just going to continue. Now, the two strategies that is most often spoken about when you're trying to decide how to negotiate is positional bargaining versus interest-based mediation. So positional bargaining is a negotiation strategy that involves you holding on to a fixed idea or a position of what you want and arguing for it and it alone, regardless of any other underlying interest that you may have. So the approach sort of frames negotiation as an adversarial zero sum exercise that focuses on claiming things rather than creating more value. Now, typically in positional bargaining, we have one party that's going to stake out a high opening position and the other correspondingly a low one, or vice versa, whichever way you want to go. But one thing that you need to understand, even though this sounds like such a negative approach to negotiation or bargaining, you need to know that there's nothing wrong with this kind of approach. If you're in a context where there aren't any additional interests for you to consider other than just the price point, let's say you're haggling with a particular vendor, or all that matters at the end of the day is the price, then there is no reason for you not to opt for this method. What you do need to make sure is that there aren't multiple interests involved. You aren't looking at one particular problem at different layers, because when there are different layers, that's when your positional bargaining tends to become a little problematic. So there's an interesting parable that we sort of talk about when we're trying to describe the difference between interest-based negotiation and positional bargaining. And it's called the Orange Sisters parable. So there are two sisters and there's one orange, and they decide to split the orange right in half because they can't really figure out what else to do with the orange. Now, thinking about it a little bit more, they realize that then they have one sister just wants to use the zest from the orange for cakes, while the other sister actually wants to use the pulp for juice. Now, instead of splitting it in half, if they had just peeled the orange and given it to one sister and the other sister took the other inside part, the actual fruit, then they would have been utilizing the orange to its maximum capacity. But they weren't able to do that because they stuck to their position that they want a part of the orange, but they didn't go into their interest to figure out which part of the orange they want. So it's really important when you're trying to focus on your interests based negotiation or mediation to remember that opposing positions doesn't always mean an opposing interest. So in this case, even though each of them wanted an equal part of the orange, it didn't mean that they wanted the same parts of the orange, or they didn't have an interest in the exact same parts of the orange. So opposing positions don't always mean opposing interests. You need to ask these why questions when you try to work on using interest-based negotiation. Why do you want the orange? Or why do you not want some particular part of the orange? Answering these questions will help you understand exactly how large your pie is, exactly how many options you have in front of you. So in the referring back to the orange parable, if we think about it, instead of splitting the pie, if they had just expanded the pie, or the orange in this case, then they would have been a lot more satisfied with the outcome of their discussion. Sorry for that. So now a lot of the problems that we face when we're trying to move from a positional based bargaining to interest-based mediation, or a lot of the a lot of the inhibitions that we have are because of premature judgments that are made, because you're seeking a single right answer. You're not looking to gather information and then build an answer collaboratively. You feel like there's a question and there's a right answer. Now, you also assume that the pie is fixed, like the sisters did. They assume that you have to cut the orange in half instead of look for that creative solution of utilizing the peel separately from the entire fruit and the pulp separately from the rest of the fruit. And you also have this whole concept or this attitude that your problem is not the same as my problem. At many a times, or maybe your problems are different, but the solution could be the exact same thing, and you don't know that because you're refusing to understand the exact problem or the interest that the other party has. So you need to make sure that when you're looking at setting your agenda and things like that, there are two main things that people think about. So you have to look at some kind of tangible position, uh, or that's your substantive outcome, exactly what's going to happen, how we're going to walk away from this conversation. These are all substantive outcomes. And you also have to look at your relationships. After this conversation is over, are we going to have a better relationship? Or is there still going to be some bad blood that we need to work on in the future? Or are we just going to walk away happy with the outcome, but never work again with each other because that trust is gone? Now, from a competition perspective, you're always going to have problems that are drafted where you need to work on a few substantive outcomes and you need to work on relationships. So that's sort of why we're talking about it in such detail. Even though in real life you may not have this particular division, when they draft a competition problem, they ideally have a few outcomes that they feel will, arise. Like the students will either have A, B, or C outcomes out of after the negotiation, and that is why you need to pay close attention to these substantive outcomes as well as the relationships, and you need to depict them very clearly so that the judges know that you have understood what they were expecting. How to deal with it, how to deal with this kind of mediation, how to really, really immerse yourself in interest-based negotiation, put yourself in the other's shoes. Now, understanding what they're going through does not in any sense mean that you're agreeing with their positions or their interests. It simply means that you're showing some kind of empathy and you're getting a better idea of where they're coming from. You also need to keep in mind that their intentions will not always be what you fear. If you think that someone is doing something for a bad reason, stop for a second, ask a couple of questions, confirm their intention and their interests before you can, materialize the thought that, oh, what I was scared of is exactly what's going on. Most of the time in mediation competitions, it's not. On the off chance that it is, if you ask the right questions and actually get it out of their mouth, then those are points for you. Make sure that you don't try to blame people. This doesn't have to be an adversarial process where you're saying that, oh, because you did this, I ended up in this situation, and that's why you need to do this in order to regain my trust. Try and make it a more collaborative process and say that I went through this at this point. Why do you think that happened? They say that, oh, it's because I did this. I understand. I'm very sorry. Then you say, so how do you think I can sort of build that trust with you again? What do you think would be a good solution? Then they give you solutions. Then you give solutions. You move on. Don't blame. A participative process, it basically means that you can't sit silent and wait for someone else to do something for you. You're going to lose points. You're going to bore the judges. Just make sure that you're always involved in um, trying to keep the ball rolling.
All right, so these are some strategies and agendas which you need to set for, as I mentioned, that you have to set down agendas with the mediator right before you go into the actual process of mediation. So these are some of the agendas which we have. One is resuming trading in shrimp between the countries. The second one would be Panem's reliability and to restore the reputation through tacit approval. And the third one would be exploration of the collaboration with Genovia into newer industries to make up for the losses. Now, these agendas are very much interest-based, as Vivek just explained. Now, this is trying to look at the interests of Panem, and this, in a way, if you understand the way these agendas are drafted, is also addressing the interests of Genovia. So, though you don't as Panem, you might not have too many bargaining chips while you enter into the session, but you need to go through a lot of information mining in the beginning. You need to look at different solutions with new information and enlarge the pie as much as possible. And enlarging this pie will not happen unless you ensure that these agendas are adhering to the interests of both Panem and Genovia. Next, we will be going into BATNA, which again Vivek will be covering.
So, like I said before, BATNA is essentially your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, and these are different from your options. Your options are basically the solutions that you create during a conversation that you're having or during a mediation, while your alternatives are what you would do if those options don't pan out or if you can't decide on something. The reason you need to know your BATNA is not just because it's part of your position paper, but it's also because it helps you cultivate a better attitude towards the negotiation or the conversation that you're having at the table. Knowing how bad or how good your alternatives to a negotiated agreement are will help you sort of set the right tone in terms of, all right, I can handle not agreeing with you on this point, or you'd be more like, no, let's revisit this, because you know in your mind that your alternatives are not good.
Right. So now that we have understood what BATNA means, is that whatever proposition or whatever you're getting in a mediation session at the end of the day, if you feel that is good enough or better than the best alternative you have, if you walk away from the mediation table, then you might as well just take on the offer and conclude the mediation then. And it is important to know this lower standard, which is like the best alternative you have, because it will give you a proper assessment of whatever is being offered in the mediation session. So let's look at some of the BATNA for Panem. And this is something which you write down in your mediation plan when you submit to the judges and the mediator. So it's important that you identify these correctly. So a few of them, first of them is building strong diplomatic ties. Now, this will be with the other countries in the nation, in the world. It won't be with Genovia. Say Genovia is like, no, we won't be taking shrimp. We will not be giving a public apology or public statement that that shrimp is fine and shrimp was not the reason behind typhoid outbreak. Then you walk away and you think, all right, so to make sure that my shrimp is still being sold in the international market, I might have to do a very aggressive marketing campaign that shrimp is good and we are ensuring we are having the topmost WHO guidelines, which we are following for testing shrimp, and we'll build strong diplomatic ties with other nations. And you will also undertake different kind of scientific research to make sure that the way your treatment of shrimp is happening is in a better format, so that other countries are convinced to buy your shrimp and again revive it. Another alternative can be that you start privatizing the shrimp industry and get more private players or international investors, or get more foreign direct investment in the industry to keep the economy going. And another alternative would be again to diversify into cotton industry, but that you would have to do it on your own. You will not be getting any infrastructure help from Genovia, which is a more experienced country in the industry, and you might have to source funds and infrastructure and know-how from other diplomatic ties which you would have built because of this particular alternative. So it's better, as you see, that you have your relationship stable with Genovia continued instead of looking for newer ties around the world. If you understand what was the BATNA, what best alternative from this negotiated agreement, which we will have at the end of mediation session, then I would request in some input for BATNA for Genovia, if people understand it, or if you have any questions. Sorry,
may I?
Yes, go for it.
Finding another country from which they can import shrimp would be one of the first,
yeah,
I suppose.
Yes.
Yeah, I said one of the first things would be to find another country from which they could import shrimp.
Of course, yes, that would be an important consideration for Genovia, because their water might be contaminated with the typhoid virus, but again, if the water is contaminated, then there might also be a reason that the shrimp were also contaminated. So it's better to look for different countries who could help you revive the tourism with the shrimp soup. That definitely is a good BATNA. Anybody else?
Think other countries help in getting medical assistance?
That is perfect. That's the next point which I was looking for. We need medical assistance to because we don't have experience in how to treat the typhoid outbreak and how to contain it. So yes, we will be looking for that. Anyone else?
Maybe approaching World Health Organization.
Of course, yeah, that is a very creative solution. I think that would be very much appreciated by the judges when they read your mediation plan. They're always looking for creativity. Like the biohazard thing, which you read in the confidential information, is actually one of the creative solutions, which I thought could have been done for the Genovia thing and before putting it into the confi information. But yes, exactly. Approaching WHO and ensuring the other countries that we have proper infrastructure or build different guidelines for treating shrimp in Genovia itself as well could help a lot, and probably get medical assistance from WHO. Definitely, that's a very good point as a BATNA. Anything
If I
relating
may,
to cotton? Yes.
Avantika has mentioned something in the chat box, and it's actually pretty smart. How do we know that the BATNA is possible at all? Perhaps no other country wants to have diplomatic ties with Panem after this incident, and that's something that judges would definitely consider. So at that point, the solution of approaching the WHO would be much better than the solution of approaching other countries. So this is, I mean, great, Avantika, you're thinking on the right track. This is how the judges are going to be thinking as well. I think Samved had raised his hand before Pradyuman, so Samved, you could go
I
ahead.
just want to add something to the Avantika's question. The thing with BATNA is that it is a best alternative. And the problem with BATNA and WATNA, as you will learn next, is that you never know will that actually even happen, which is why coming to a negotiated agreement in this mediation session makes more sense than going to the BATNA. BATNA is just the best alternative, which may or may not happen. But if you do come to an agreement in this mediation session, it will be more attractive than the BATNA. And you will have the same question in WATNA as well, because WATNA will sound much worse than BATNA. So
Adding
that's
on
the
to what
idea.
she's saying, like just to continue that thought process, that's probably what the judges care most about. If your alternatives are better than the agreement that you have reached at the mediation table, that's considered to be a failure to protect your interests. So you need to make sure that your best and your worst alternatives are definitely not as good as the solution or the agreement that you guys reach at the table. So
That would
it's
be a
Samved,
competition perspective as well.
yeah. So Samved, Pradyuman, and then Mudit, please.
Yeah, I think I would just like to bring back my original point. Investing in, I mean, someone else mentioned going to WHO to solve the typhoid problem. So using that in order to improve their own cotton infrastructure so they can stop depending on other countries for importing cotton.
Yep, that's a good one. Next, Pradyuman.
Yeah, am I audible? Yeah, I have a doubt here. My doubt is to what extent are we allowed to actually manufacture certain hypothetical information? So in like specifically in terms of this situation, like if we are representing the delegation of Genovia here, then till what extent can we actually make a statement on the negotiation table which sounds like that we've already found a replacement partner to a country such as Panem who was exporting shrimps to us. So, till what extent are we allowed to do that?
That's a good question. You definitely have to be careful that you don't overstep the boundaries of what is given to you in the factual situation, the common information and the confidential information. You can play along with it as long as it is reality tested. That's a concept which you will learn tomorrow or at by the end of today, that you need to reality test it, that how possible it is to actually achieve such an outcome. Just to make a small edit to your question, that you won't be stating your BATNA or your WATNA at the mediation table. This is for your position paper. Whatever we are doing today is for your mediation plan and your position paper. It's not necessary for you to state it at the table. It's something you will keep in your mind while you're mediating. And it might come up now and then as and when you feel it's important to raise it. But it's not necessary for you to state BATNA to the other party at the table, because the other party might just get offended saying that, oh, if you're telling me what is your BATNA or your best alternative, why should we even come to this mediation? So you might not have to
But
say it there.
to your point, like Pradyuman, you ideally should not say that you have secured another, vendor or another country or anything. You just hint at the fact that that is a possibility.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so
Also,
next
there's a
would be
very
Mudit
interesting
and then
question
Pranav.
from Tanmay in the chat. Can't the WHO aid fireback since they might find out the cause for typhoid as contamination in the water? Well, that can depend on how Genovia approaches the WHO, if they're just asking for medical help rather than investigating into the actual issue or not. Again, that is a very good point to raise. You need to think about such issues, about how it can be a best alternative. It may not be the best idea for Genovia to use it. But if you phrase it in a way, say that only for medical assistance and not investigation, then I guess it can be a proper BATNA in your paper. Moving on to the next questions that we have.
I think
Yeah,
it's Mudit. Yeah.
yeah, thank you so much. So I had a point regarding the fashion week that Genovia wants to conduct. So if at the moment my cotton industry is not that feasible because of all the contamination, so maybe I can try expanding the scope of my fashion week to incorporate other types of clothing. Maybe that will also have a wider appeal and attract more people for my fashion week. So I won't be exactly relying on cotton, and my fashion week will also be successful.
Okay,
I
so
feel that
this,
that is a good solution, but I feel it is kind of it needs to be reality tested again. If there's a reason why you need cotton for it, then I guess that might for a fashion week you might not be able to explore into different kind of material which you can use up. There's a reason why they are trying to make cotton as a negotiable point in the confidential information itself. This is what the earlier person was asking, that you have to be careful about how creative are you getting with your solution and your alternatives. This might be just overstepping a little bit. It does sound good, but it again will be reality tested by the judges and say how feasible it is to even consider it in such a situation. What if the designers don't want anything else? So since this problem is quite fictional, there are definitely some flaws in it. But again, you have to be careful about how far you're going with your creativity. But it is
and
a
to
good
be
solution.
blunt, that was too far. I mean, like just saying, I know Sweeney sort of said it in a very diplomatic sense, and but Mudit, to be completely honest, if you put that in your position paper, the judge would mark you down, because that kind of creativity or that kind of stepping is just not okay.
Thank you for
Soumya,
being blunt. I won't be making this mistake in a competition now.
good,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah,
Soumya,
I think it's just for the betterment of everybody. Don't take it to
Yeah,
your
so
heart.
right now, what Mudit said, it would it become a what now for the country?
sorry, what was that?
The point which Mudit said, the looking for different kind of material, would it become a what now for what now for Genovia?
It would be a Watna if it was real enough, if it was something that could possibly be done. I feel that wouldn't be a Watna anyways. I think it's just too expanded a thought. Approaching WHO seems creative because that is something which is there in the information, common information, where they are in touch with WHO to set different guidelines and whatever. And there is a possibility of getting aid. But I think what Mudit said might just be a little too far for even to be considered in Botna. I guess Vivek can explain it better once he explains BATNA. So let's move on because we still have a little bit to
Yeah,
cover.
we
Sorry
have
for,
a time crunch also. We've already crossed the
yeah,
time. We really apologize, guys. I know that Sweeney
so
put up a
sorry.
message earlier. So I'm gonna just zip through this. It is the opposite of BATNA, the worst that can happen if you walk away, and it's very uncertain. This is something that is going to be very difficult for you to say that, this XYZ is going to happen. So usually your whatna is just left to be, we're going to litigate the issue, or we're going to move to arbitration. Something like that is usually what your whatna is.
Yeah, BATNA may not be the most attractive of the answers. BATNA sounds a bit, exciting that there is a possibility that things might be good if you walk away from the mediation session. BATNA may not necessarily be it. For example, over here, it's that we might just not end up finding other buyer countries for shrimp or cotton, we might just continue to face economic diversification issues, or you might not even expand into cotton industry at all because you do not have the infrastructure, the space, or the technical know-how. So it does not sound very attractive, but that is okay because that is what Matna is. It doesn't always have to be very sugary and nice. Moving on. Next, we have zone of
Right.
possible
So
agreement.
essentially, your zone of possible agreement is the where you sort of look for the common ground. You figure out whether there's some kind of reservation value, in the sense you have your bottom limit or your upper limits in terms of how much you can negotiate. Any kind of surplus that can be divided between the parties would fall under your zone of possible agreement, and any information asymmetries that you would like to clear up can fall under your zone of possible agreement. We have a bunch of questions. As you stated that Batna and Watna must not be as attractive as the mediation agreement in place, can we explain why Batna isn't that good in our position statement? So in your actual position paper, like what you're submitting to the judges, it's good to have one line saying that we do not want either of these alternatives to possible agreement for XYZ reasons because they're not beneficial to us. But saying something like that in your actual round could be it's a questionable sort of stance to take. I'm not sure exactly where you would fit that into the conversation. And if you do manage to fit it into the conversation, I'm not sure if you're gaining yourself more bargaining chips. You're sort of saying, if you do not do this for me, then all of these bad things will happen. And that doesn't always look good. But if you're in a context where you need to let your guard down, you need to make the other party understand that you are in a tight spot and their help will be very beneficial to you, then that is a great strategy to employ. So a couple things about the, Mudit, your hand is raised. Do you have anything that you want to say?
No, I forgot to
Oh,
take
okay.
it down. Sorry.
Cool, that's okay. So it's important for you to make sure that the roles are clearly defined when you're going into a mediation round. So for a client, he needs to have the best perception of business interests and priorities. You need to make sure that as the client, you're thinking as a businessman, you're worrying about the consequences of every kind of solution that's put in front of you. You need to be an actively involved member because this is your business or this is your life that you're mediating at this point. As the client, you can't just take the backseat as you would in a litigation scene or in an arbitration scene. You need to make sure that not only are you emoting, but you're also talking numbers, you're also talking facts. It's not just an emotions game, as many other people have said before with regards to the role of the client. Now, make sure that your attorney does not dominate or you do not dominate over your attorney. You both need to have a clear balance of the different topics that you're going to be talking about, and that needs to show so that judges understand that you have strategized, you have a plan with regards to how you're going to split the roles between you two. And as we said earlier, that is something that you will be scored on. Relationship building. Make sure that as a client, you're taking that relationship seriously. You're really immersing yourself into it and you're smiling and you're saying that, yes, we are going to have a good relationship moving forward. I feel like we can do these probable activities. Like, we should go play golf next weekend, or we should definitely get into this new venture together. Small things like this show that you do care about the relationship aspect and the dynamic between you two. Industrial knowledge, if you're going into a problem where there is a lot to do, like let's say the problem has to do with solar panels, and you need to learn a little bit about how solar panels work, what the standards are in terms of the type of panels that you need to use for a particular device, whether the standards differ from region to region, things like this. These are research points that you should do. And in large competitions, there actually is a lot that needs to be looked up. For example, in ICC Paris, I had a problem that had to do with GIs, which is geographical indications. And with regards to different cheeses and wines that were in France, it was important for me as the client to know from what region which different types of cheeses came. It was important for me to have knowledge of precedence in terms of whether or not a particular cheese was given a GI and on what grounds. So these are just a quick example of how having that industry knowledge is very, very important. Now, the role of the council, you need to make sure that you handle all of the legalities. If at the end of the day you're saying that you're going to draft up a non-disclosure agreement, it is your job to mention the non-disclosure agreement and to ensure that the other party agrees to sign that agreement. If you're going to have a payment plan for recuperating of some kind of cost or some kind of loss that you had, make sure that you tell them that we're going to work out an interest rate. We're going to work out a time period for you to pay back the principal amount. Things like this are very important. Now, ensuring that you use the correct principles. If at any point you do want to say that according to this legal principle, make sure that you're right, that you're not incorrectly using it. Even though we do not say that you should use legal principles, that you should bring them in, that you should involve them in the mediation round. Even if you do, it's important that you're not involving the wrong principles or that you're using it incorrectly. Make sure that you separate the people from the problem. As the council, it is your job to ensure that you can separate emotions from everything. You can make sure that the identities of the people on each side, like let's say someone has a gambling history and there's a problem there, it's important for you to decide whether to separate that issue from the person and make that an objective fact and not something that enrages you or that makes you want to say that, oh, you're this alcoholic gambler, I don't think we can trust you, all of that. So that's a poor example, but I hope you're getting the point of separating the people from the problem. Reality testing, as we talked about, it's important for you to make sure that if a solution is put in front of you, you think about it, whether it's practical or not, and pointing out to the other party as well as to your client, I'm not sure, maybe this isn't going to work out in real life. We should really rethink about the consequences. What do you think? How do you think we could probably change this to make sure that it does work out? Summarizing, make sure that after your client has said a lot of different things, if it seems a little chaotic and you're not able, or you feel that the other party would not have understood it properly, make it into a point-by-point format. Say 1, 2, 3 is what my client just said, and we would like to hear from your side about 1, 2, 3. So even the questions, if the client says that I have these doubts, I have these issues, you list them out in question format and say that first I'd like you to answer this, then this, then this.
All right, so coming to the role of mediator, the main role would be for you to set the agendas in the very beginning, right after the opening statements, where you summarize, I think this is what I mentioned yesterday, where you summarize whatever are the first impressions which the parties have mentioned and set the agendas in 2 or 3 points and say that this is what we will be discussing in this session, and make sure that you're leading the session in a way that you are following the structure and you're following that you're discussing one agenda at a time and not mixing everything up. The second part is that you have to be fair and unbiased. Now, the main issue with mediators should be that you're not passing any judgments. You're not evaluating or saying that, are you sure you want to do this? And you should not make any of the other party feel that, okay, that the mediator is supporting one party more than the other. Your main job over here is to be fair and make sure that you're treating both the parties at par. The second point is that you have to maintain confidentiality. Confidentiality it comes at the very center of any mediation at all. The reason why you want to go to mediation is to ensure that none of the dispute matters go out into the world, which may probably impact your reputation, your company's reputation, or in the international market in this scenario. You need to ensure as a mediator that you maintain confidentiality, even if something is told to you in private in a caucus, which we will teach you tomorrow as well. If something is told to you in private, unless the party tells you that you can reveal it to the other party or they want you to reveal, you must not reveal it and you must maintain utmost confidentiality. Next is listen to both sides. You need to make sure that is similar to being fair and unbiased, and you're actively listening to both the sides, and you're understanding what the other side's concerns are, and try to facilitate the process by making sure that there is effective communication which is happening. And this can only happen by active listening, where you're listening to the unsaid, reading between the lines in the session. Like they will not be, the parties won't be saying, oh, this is my goal today, this is my position today, this is my patna, this is my vatna. No, you cannot say such thing. You go in with and go into a conversation. So you need to deduce all these things from listening and actively listening to both sides, and facilitating communication. The next point is maintaining calm and decorum. So what happens in a lot of the mediation sessions is that temperatures go high. You need to be the thermometer in the room, that you need to make sure that the emotions are stable, everybody is calm in the room. And every time if you feel that, okay, there's some information which is put on the table and it is so devastating that you need to take a break, call for a break and say that, okay, we can call for a caucus, and just calm down for a bit and make sure everybody's feeling comfortable. Next is list down the relevant interests and positions. I think that would also be kind of your personal idea to do, that you're trying to find out what is exactly that the parties want and see if there's any common ground between the interests where you can actually find a solution which is common for both the parties. Again, check in with the parties' emotions. Reality seeker, this is what Vivek mentioned for the role of counsel. It is also the role of the mediator, more so than the counsel himself or herself. Reality testing is extremely important, especially from a competition perspective, where everything is a made up scenario. And as we were discussing that, things, you can come up with creative solutions and ask for biohazard laws or whatever. But you need to make sure how feasible it is and how actually it can be done, and making sure that you are reality testing every point or every solution that is being proposed will actually gain you points from the judges. So you need to make sure this is not only for real life mediations, but very much so from your score sheet perspective and your judges perspective. So be sure that you are proposing realistic solutions and you think there is something to get out of it. Just don't go wild with everything you see. Explore options and solutions. Make sure that you're having a proper structure, and every time there will be this brainstorming that everybody's putting in different options and solutions, try to list them down, try to make a structure which is easily understandable. If you're in an online format, just put it in the chat, or if you're in actual session, there's usually a board behind you where you can list down different options and agendas, and go to these options and explore them in detail. So once you say that, okay, let's look at develop new biohazard guidelines so that we check the shrimps and how to test them. So once you say that as an agenda or a sub agenda, you go into it much deeper. Who is going to look into these particular guidelines? Will you ask the health ministers to do it? What kind of guidelines will you look at it? So you have to make sure that you go into these very details, and you make sure that all these details and specificities are agreed upon by both the parties. Ensuring that they are agreed by both the parties is extremely important at every point in the mediation session, and noting that down, because in the end, when you come down to conclusion, it's important that you make sure that everything is agreed upon and everybody is in the same page and there's a meeting of minds. And lastly is resource expansion, which is pretty much as the options and solutions, and your job will be to try and explore as much as you can, try and use the interest-based mediation. It is not only for the clients and counsels, but for you to deduce these interests and try and create as much of a bigger pie as possible. And that would be the role of the mediator. I see a question in the chat box, which is by Charul. She says, is it the position of mediator to interject over parties' stand regarding a position? Depends on what kind of position it is. You can't interject and say that, oh, I'm sorry, but this is wrong for you to say. That's usually what the client says. So you can just interrupt. You can definitely interrupt and say, okay, how about we just calm down over here? And then you can ask, what about, why do you think is the way? If you could give us more clarity into it? But that is something which the clients and counsels usually do. And do not try to overstep your role as a facilitator, unless it's an evaluative mediation, but that is something in reality situations, not for competition. So for competition perspective, try and not pass judgments as much as possible. So as a mediator, can you ask parties how they plan to carry out a proposed solution? Yes, you can do that. That becomes a part of reality testing. You can say, all right, so since we have put this solution forward. How about we explore a little bit more, and you can tell us like, what do you see, how do you want to go about this, so we can have some clarity and we can set it down in our list of solutions. Yes, you can definitely do that.
To answer Manav's question, right before we do that, Pradyuman, you've had your hand up for a while. Do you want to ask your question?
Sure.
Yeah, so my question is basically pertaining to the division of role between a client and a counsel. So, is it like a considered practice that the creative solutions or any other plans that are being proposed by a particular party have to come from the client's end only?
So
No,
it
there's
really,
nothing like that.
yeah.
Sorry, Swinny, do you want to take that or should I continue?
Continue, I can take over later.
Okay, so Pradyuman, it matters more about how you just, so let's say there's the division of roles more has to do with how you take a particular question or how you answer questions that are coming at you. If a question has to do with numbers or legal aspects, then the counsel should respond. If it has to do with something with regards to the business interests, then the client should respond. Posing of a particular solution is usually a joint effort where the client gives you the basic ground rules of that solution or the underlying foundation of it, and the client and the counsel explains it a little bit more in detail and gives you the legal background of it. So the division of roles needs to be a fine balance where you both aren't one person deals with part A of the mediation, one person deals with part B. You need to find that harmony between each other where if there is a question, then in that question, I will answer these parts and you will answer these parts. If we make a statement, then I will state these parts of the whole statement and you will deal with the rest of it.
Yes, I agree with that. To simply put it, of the 2 slides and the 4 slides which we've spoken about the roles, councils handle the technicalities once you want to go into the much deeper questions. And even if it is not very legal per se, as far as it is very much technical and you feel that you might advise better on this particular situation, go for it. You're the counsel. If you feel that this is something pertaining to your business, or if you're in a commercial mediation, if you're in any other form of mediation, if you feel this is pertaining to your own personal interests, then I think it would be the client's role. So technicalities versus business interests is what
Swinny,
normally.
I have to stop you there for a second because
Yes.
due to the lack of time, I feel like we need to get to the other questions as well. So what I just did there, interrupting Swinny because I felt like there was a lack of time, is answering Manav's next question. How exactly does a mediator maintain control over the conversation, keeping in mind that it's a client-driven process, if this makes sense? So yes, it does make sense. It's a great question. And interrupting, like I just interrupted Swinny, and saying that I'm interrupting you for this reason, I need you to keep in mind that we are on a schedule, that we have this agenda that we've collectively decided on, and I feel like you're straying from that agenda or straying from the time. That's how you maintain control of the conversation while still keeping it a client-driven process. You're not saying that you got to listen to me. You're reminding them that they've made decisions at the beginning of this procedure and that they need to follow through on those decisions that they made.
I think that was such a nice way to answer the question. That was so great.
Okay,
Um,
Charul asked her next question pertaining to Kiara's question. If the mediator asks the question, then can an opposite party, while listening to plan, propose what their interest is in accordance with the answer? That was a
yes,
long
of course you
question.
can. I think that's similar to what Mana was saying. Actually, uh, mediator wants to maintain the control over the conversation, is what Mana was saying. But the same way we can answer Charles' question is that, yes, if you have a better plan to propose, you can definitely do it by saying, all right, so what if we use the solution like in this way? You can rephrase a offer and you can paraphrase an offer and put it forward. Of course, you don't necessarily need to stick to who goes first, who goes second, once you're done with the opening statements and setting up agendas. Whatever you feel right, and you feel this is a decent time to interrupt, and I think you think that this is the best point where you can make this particular solution or a suggestion, go for it. And as long as you're being respectful in the process and you're clarifying and you're making sure that the other party is not feeling bad about that you interrupted or whatever, mediators never feel bad, should not really feel bad about being spoken over by a client or counsel, because that's the job. But yes, go for it, whatever you feel is right.
The main thing to keep in mind is that no one feels like you're taking the other person's side. That's you just need to make sure that regardless of what suggestions you make, you maintain your neutrality in the entire process.
Yeah, we will actually be going into this questioning part in detail tomorrow about what happens in a mediation session. Today was a lot of theory. Tomorrow is like when all the practical stuff comes in, and I think you guys will enjoy that a lot. So coming to the last slide, finally, we will be closing the session. So sorry for extending by half an hour. That's just as simple as you need to solve the position paper test tonight or whenever you want to by the end of this week before hopefully the practice session on the Lumos learning platform. That is going to cover majorly what we taught today, the goals and objectives, positions and interests, strategy, BATNA, VATNA, and the roles. The questions will be pretty simple. You don't need to go into too much depth of explaining as long as you're very clear and you even put it in a point format the way we put it on our slides. That should be enough for you to get the marks you need. Just solve it, but those questions will be based on the other problem, which is Maybelline versus Farm Easy. That's the test problem which we're having. So hopefully just go over it quickly and you will be able to answer it as easily as you guys were answering today in this session. And we were so happy to see so much engagement today. And it was such a great session. And we have so many people till the very end, even though we extended by half an hour. I think it's worth extending half an hour if we are trying to convey as much information as possible. And we are seeing a lot of engagement. So that makes me really happy. I think we can end the class over here for now. You're free to leave.
We actually have one more question that we should quickly answer because I think that it does have a lot of relevance. So it reads, in certain problems, don't you think that the best alternative for a party can sound much better than any of the possible negotiation agreements it can enter into with the other party? In that case, would that party be marked low on marks by the judges if it negotiates a deal that is not better than the best alternative?
Sorry, can I just
So,
stop
like
you
I
there,
said,
Vivek, one
yes.
second? We will just say that we have concluded like the slides over here and whatever we had to teach. We will be staying back for a lot of questions and answers. So if you have to go, you can, but it'll be great if you just stick around for all the questions. So if you have to leave, you're free to, but we have a lot of questions coming in right now as well. So we will be clearing that and we'll be hanging around for a few minutes. So yes, go ahead with the answer. Sorry.
Oh yeah, okay. So I should read the question again. My mind just wandered. Yes, you will be marked low. So ideally, when you're thinking about your best alternatives for agreement, then you should definitely make sure that it's not better than the possible solutions that you're thinking about during your pre mediation stage. So when you're planning in your preparatory stage, make sure that the solutions that you think of, your zone of possible agreement, is is a much rosier picture than what is your best alternative or your worst alternative, obviously.
All right, we have a question from Mana for the first slide, and we have two questions from Niyati coming. So we'll just answer Manav's question first. If we could go to the first slide. He says, is there a chance to arrive at the last two solutions if the other party, say, is kind of hostile? Of course there is. I have seen in one of the competitions I went to, the other party just came in and they just crossed their hands, and somehow it was very appreciated behavior by the judges. They thought it's very realistic that business people do walk in like that, and they thought it's quite real. And somehow that was reality testing for them. But again, so that can happen that the other party is quite hostile, and there can be situations where you reveal such an information, they're just like, okay, this is it, I've had enough. But there's always a way to go about it, and that is rephrasing yourself, changing your options, taking a break, going through caucus. You can always come somehow to a compromise or at least a win and win by trying to, if you're being as much cooperative as much the other party is hostile, there's definitely a way to work around it. Unless the other party is just like, sorry, we don't want to do this. But that won't happen in a competition. In real life, may be possible, yes.
A quick example of what I've done, like in a round once, we walked in and it was very important for us to get an apology from the other party. I don't exactly remember what the issue was, but when so I was very angry, very upset, yelling at him, borderline, cussing at the guy. And then finally, when he apologized, I was like, that is what I was looking for. That is what I was waiting for. Do you mean what you say when you apologize? And then from there, obviously, we were very collaborative and it worked out. But we definitely did get good feedback for that whole approach as well. So
Yeah, a
Niyati's
lot of the times the judges appreciate a bit of drama, and that's the one of the fun distinctions between mediation competitions and moot court arbitration litigation competitions, is that you can express emotions over here in an actual competition, and you can be marked well if you show it to the correct amount and for a legitimate reason. So yes. Niyati's question is, could you please reiterate the point about the extent to which you can hypothesize the facts? All right, so I don't have any.
I think the best way to answer this is it has to be within reason.
Yeah.
So, like I said earlier, you cannot hypothesize the existence of a new vendor, but you can hypothesize the whole search for a new vendor. Like, obviously, there are other vendors than just Panem for shrimp. So, for Genovia, a very viable option would be to look for another country. But you cannot say, I'm going to, XYZ country, because it's too far. Also, if it's a numbers game, you cannot hypothesize that my company is able to afford another 4,000 rupees or whatever. If it says that your budget is 10,000, your budget is 10,000. Don't say, oh, it's just 4,000. You're anyway spending 10,000. You can add another 4,000. No, it doesn't work like that. Niyati, do you have any? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, because my thing was, you said going to the WHO for helping Genovia would be feasible, but because if we're thinking in terms of reality, right? Even though the countries are fictional, we're thinking of it in the present world today. So, why would it be so out of the box to say that, we will just use different fabrics? Because there's so many fabrics available. Cotton is not the only fabric available. So, to include that in the position paper, did you say the judges would mark you low? Because it is a possible option, right?
It is, but it's not. It's specifically mentioned in your config that you need cotton. So it's not. It sort of the cotton thing was mentioned in the other person's config, in Panem's config, as well as Genovia's config. So when a fact has been given to you saying that there is a need for cotton, you cannot deny that and say that, no, I'm going to go on another route. It doesn't say anything about where you can get medical help from. It only says that you need medical help. So, or it says that you need prawns, and you can go to other countries, or you can go to the WHO for that kind of help. That's reasonable, but it's unreasonable to deny the config.
Yeah, I mean, what you mean by extending or going beyond the config is creating needs which are not there. So it says that there's a need for cotton, but you can't say that there's a need for linen and you can say that, okay, we're going to go to the linen industry to save the fashion week. That's not the need. The fashion week needs cotton. You can't create a need out of nowhere. On top of that, if say Panem is an aquaculture based economy and they don't have shrimp buyers right now, you can't say that we'll sell some other kind
salmon,
of fish.
yeah,
We can't say
exactly.
we'll sell salmon and recover our economy. That's not the point. It says that shrimp is a major economy of of Panem. So you kind of have to stick within the boundaries. If there is a scope for, if they've given you, if I know for like another version of this problem, if like the biohazard line was not there, they would have just said that you need new guidelines. That's when you can come up with say biohazard or international guidelines, or again reiterate on ministers coming in and drafting new guidelines. So because it's pointing you towards that direction. If it is pointing you towards that direction, going a little bit further is okay, but you can't just not just make up anything out of the air. So that's the point. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I had another one, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Niyati, does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I got that. It's about conveys in general. So we had a practice round, at least the NALSA students had a practice round, and the problem had mentioned a certain fact, but neither confidential information had reiterated that fact. So there was a conflict between two people, and one person said they had a witness, but in that person's confidential information, there was no information about a witness. And the other party kept asking, could you please elaborate? Could you please elaborate? So what in that sense is,
Is this a
what are you supposed
Star
to do?
Wars? Is this a
Yes,
Star Wars kind of?
yeah, it was a Star Wars one,
That was a
yes.
badly drafted problem to begin with.
Yeah.
B, if there is something in there, and that happens a lot of times in competitions, happens with me, has happened with me also, that there's a common information out there and then they ask you, so do you have any idea about this? And you can just be like, sorry, we do not have any further idea on this. We could help you out, but that's not there. And if you're being honest enough, they leave it there. Like in this problem itself, Genovia doesn't have the clarity that it was the contaminated water which spread the outbreak crazily in the country. Okay, I've still left, like while drafting the problem, I left that sort of gap over there purposely, so that there is some level of negotiation for Genovia, and it doesn't have to be the extreme culprit in the situation.
But
So
with
it
regards to that specific thing that she was saying, that the witness, whether or not this has happened to me as well, where people just throw information and you're like, wait, what? Now my entire situation is screwed. So, what ideally you should do is say, okay, if you have this witness, we definitely discuss possibilities at a later date when I can actually have my lawyers do a deposition or something like that. So hope that the judges realize that they've thrown this curveball that wasn't given in their country, that they will be marked down for it, but maintain your composure and respond realistically. Say that, okay, we also need to do the deposition of the witness. After that, can we move ahead with deciding a settlement or some kind, whatever the problem was, move forward with it based on the
That's
context.
when information gathering comes in. You need to keep asking more and more questions, mine more information, and see if they have any other information which you do not have, and then try to figure out what you can do. If you cannot find out, then you can simply leave it at that and say that maybe we can discuss later. Like in this problem, if you don't find the answer to who is the culprit for the typhoid outbreak, then you might just leave it there. Say, all right, let's just move on from the problem and talk about our future rather than thinking about our past. Moving on to another question. Sukrut says, also for a client, how much drama is too much drama? Walking out would be too much drama.
Don't throw things. People have thrown things at me. That's not good. Don't throw things.
What?
Yeah. It's also some people, like we had this Marvel problem once, and then this dude just walked in and goes Wakanda forever, and I don't know what to do. Like, so I also just did the thing, and I sat down and I was smiling, but it makes the other party very uncomfortable. So don't do things like this. It just
Sometimes
throws you off your game.
there was this one time where we had like two different countries who had different languages and culture. Like the problem was based on that, oh, the cultures are so different, and that's why you're trying to negotiate or whatever. And somebody put on a fake accent once, and they were like, sorry, we cannot understand you because of our different cultures. It gets appreciated sometimes, but a lot of the times it's just a problem. You need to be careful. Like there was this one time where the horse which we were trying to sell had died, and we were trying to hide that the horse was not dead. And that was a legitimate reason why the other party got angry, and they were like, you know what, we need a break. And then they just left the room. That was, you get a break of 3 minutes in a round. That's under the rules of a lot of the competition. So they just went out and they're like, oh my God, the horse is dead. What are we going to do? So yeah, you can express anger, but to a limit. I think you will yourself know what is the limit. There's no fixed formula for it. Moving on to next question.
Physically, I have a limit. The max you can do physically is like pound your fist on the table. Anything beyond that is just excessive.
Yeah, people
like
are just
throwing
like,
papers, all of that. Like just don't do it. Next question is, how does a mediator maintain neutrality while questioning if the solutions proposed are feasible or realistic? So when you're asking someone, just make sure you don't ask it with like, oh, are you stupid? Like ask them, okay, so if this happened, how would this solution work out? What would that lead to? Just make sure that your tone is not like, oh my God, that's such a, like, don't make it a sarcastic question or be like, okay, this is a rhetorical question. Genuinely ask, okay, but if this situation occurred, then wouldn't the solution cause some issues, or wouldn't that lead to a bad outcome? Samved and Pradyuman have had their hands up for quite some time. Please go ahead. Pradyuman, go ahead so that there's no confusion.
No, that was just I just forgot to put it down. I'm sorry for the inconvenience.
Okay. So Samved,
I think that's
Yeah, I just wanted to ask more on the whole information and making up information. Again, we had a practice round in Nalsar a couple of weeks ago, and if either of you had adjudicated over there, it had to do with a horse getting a disease. And so one of the parties said that none of the other horses that came to the competition had got the disease, but your horse got it. And so in the heat of, I mean, in that moment, you don't know how to react to that information, right? Because it isn't in the general information, and we assume that it wasn't in the confidential information as well. So how do you, is that allowed, or do judges look down upon that, or how are you supposed to react to situations like that?
from what I remember, there's nothing like that given in the CI. Or was it there? Because I remember judging that round. Samved?
Yeah. No, I was in the opposing team, so we didn't read the other teams. We didn't read the quote unquote Olympic committee's confi, but they had claimed that none of the other countries that came for the competition had contracted the disease. And so that is sort of solidifying their position as we are not responsible for it. So in that sort of a situation,
Right.
how do you react? And can you make up
Don't freak out. And in that particular situation that you're talking about, I remember that they were responsible for the transportation of the horse. Am I right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you have to keep that in mind. Maybe the transportation, they didn't follow the regulations that are required during transport. Maybe they, and I think that was there in their confi as well, that they had not, I think it was Brazil or some country did not maintain the specific regulations or that were required in terms of hygiene and cleanliness for the actual box that they transported the horse in. So when someone throws you a curveball like that, first step back, look at your situation again, look at the general facts and see where there are some gaps. Ask more questions there so that you can find a little bit of bargaining room for yourself. Sweeney, do you have anything to add? Because, I mean,
that makes sense.
That can happen a lot of the times. You can just try to play. You have to be calm and you have to like ask more information. And if they are making up things out of nowhere, then just try to make sure that it is something which is not there in the confi. You just need to ask more questions on it. If they don't have too many details, then just move on and talk about something else and come back to it later. That can happen.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Back to it later. I was about to say, whatever happens, don't get God. No, I need proof on this. I need you to somehow justify what you're saying. All of that. Just stay as calm as possible and ask questions. Maybe move on, like Sweeney said.
Yeah.
Is there anything else?
Just don't
Can
talk
I
in
add to
circles.
that? Oh, someone else can go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sure.
So I had a question. So, in the usually when mediators are competing against each other, there are two mediators in a session. So how do you like divide it? Like if you feel like you're speaking too much or the other is not speaking that much. So how do you like balance it out between the two?
So normally you just reach a few minutes before the session, speak to your mediator, or if you know them, if they've already told you can contact them earlier, then you can just split your roles quietly. And then the way clients and counsels usually split their role, they have these very quiet signatures to each other, like that they want to speak first over here and there. You can do it with the mediator as well. Try and find some kind of common ground where you can decide where you want to speak and the other person wants to speak. Just try to divide up your roles, saying that, okay, you want to take charge of the session and making sure that you are going in a particular structure or anything, and you want to take up more of the solutions part or something like that. But mostly just come up with different signatures that you want to speak more. We don't try to overpower the entire session just because there is another mediator competing with you in the round and take up everybody's time, especially the clients and the counsels. It makes everybody annoyed that if you're just speaking just because you have to and there's another mediator in the room. Try to be as reasonable and rational as possible, and make good decisions and you should be fine. It doesn't matter how much you get to speak or not. It's just how much sense you made and where did you step in at the correct time is what matters in such a situation. And that's where the judges mark you. I think
So
Vivek can
when
add
you're
better.
dividing roles with mediators, what you have to make sure to do is split your opening statement appropriately. So when we talk tomorrow, you'll be learning that a mediator's opening statement needs to have a bunch of different points. Make sure that those points are equally split and neither of you are repeating what the other person has said. Now, mediators also have to keep tabs of what's going on in a conversation, hopefully using a visual aid. So while we do online mediations, I like to have a Google document that's shared with everyone, and I try to share my screen as well, and things are kept on that. One of the mediators can be in charge of writing things down, while the other mediator is in charge of speaking those things and explaining what's on the board. Or you could have maybe one mediator that's involved that's in charge of working on different numbers and summarizing, while the other mediator is in charge of interrupting and asking questions. So usually I don't like to keep the division between the mediators very, very frigid. As Swinny said, I like to have some kind of, like, if I tap your leg or if I nudge your shoulder or if I text you on WhatsApp that I want to go next, just respect that you have this understanding and do not break the code that you set with your co-mediator before going into the round.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Doesn't look like we have more questions. And
Yeah, we went
we
on
can,
for quite some time today. And there are
yeah.
still 30
Excuse me.
people in the meeting.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Aman.
I have a follow-up question with like Kiara's question. It happens like there are two neutral mediators. So one mediator could get partial to his team or like her team. So what to do in that case?
So normally the mediators, the way they are scheduled, they are not the mediators in which your client and counsel are there. Your mediators will be going and mediating any other session. So that's how it normally goes. Am I right, Vivek?
Sorry, what was that? I zoned out.
No, I didn't mean that. I was
So,
like meaning to say that okay, if a team is preparing and
yeah.
client and counsel have such opinions on such part of the problem, then a mediator could say that okay, my friends did this thing in that case, so I could apply this to in this room. So like you, I'm not like clearly expressing it, but you might get the idea.
No, I understood what you're saying. So ideally, the way you should do that, so this doesn't have much to do with the division of roles between co-mediators, but that is a great way to sort of share your experience as well as lead to some kind of creative solution that maybe the other parties have not seen. So if there's a clear rift and the parties are not sure what to do next, at that point when they've reached that impasse, you can say that. Another mediation that I have been a part of had this particular conflict and they resulted with this. And then at that point, you could even stress saying that I hope that you don't ask me any more information about the case because it is confidential and I like to maintain my professionalism. So that's a great way to hit like, two birds with one stone, confidentiality as well as the creative solutions part. But that is a great example that you gave.
Okay, thank you.
Did that answer your question, or was I just like, good?
No, like this thing happened with us, and it was sort of situation that the other mediator like get along with the idea that okay, my friend did this, so he shared with me that we should go like this in this situation. So I was like, no, like I had a conflicting opinion, so like the whole session was screwed up at last.
So this was between you and another mediator, where there was
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
disagreement.
Sometimes happen the other
Oh,
mediator like doesn't go along with you, so the things get really messed up at the end, and both of you don't get a chance to win or like even to compete further in the whole round of competition. So it gets
so
really screwed up.
sometimes that's just bad luck, but a
Yeah.
way for you to deal with what happened with that guy, you could have said, alternatively, this is another way that you could go. So let him give his solution, let him suggest whatever he wants. don't disagree with him, because that's just going to end up in him saying, but no, you could also. So it essentially, by disagreeing, you're starting an argument. Instead of saying that, just say, additionally, you can also say this. You can also do this. Yeah, Sunny.
Okay. I think I got the question wrong earlier, but if there's another mediator, just remember that at the end of the day, it's a voluntary process for the clients and the councils. So make sure that the clients and all councils are okay with the solution, whatever the two mediators are proposing, and making sure that they are coming to the decision rather than the mediators fighting over a solution. If I got the question wrong, I'm really sorry.
No, it's fine. Like, to be honest, in that situation, the things weren't getting like really nice from the start. So I
Okay.
like quite expected that.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So I had
Yeah.
a
Any more
question.
questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is, to what extent is a mediator allowed to propose solution? Like, where is the line wherein if he goes beyond that, it's like, okay, no, you're doing too much, and like, where is the line regarding
I
In a
proposing
1 hour
solution?
session, in a 1 hour competition, try to speak about solutions for maybe 5 minutes or less. If you're going above and beyond that, like you're explaining the solution, then you're giving another solution, like you've given almost all of the creative solutions at the table, that I feel would be excessive.
Yeah, I think just limit yourself to facilitating the process more. If you do have a creative solution where you feel like, oh my God, this might help the parties, then sure, go ahead and just say or make changes to whatever the clients have already proposed a solution. So,
uh,
as I see that the conflict over here between both of you is that this is not working out for you. So, what if we made this solution in such a format? So, do you guys think this would be acceptable to you? Just making it as polite as possible and just constantly asking for their affirmation should be fine enough from the judge's perspective, and also to not piss off the teams in the competition. So that should be fine. Just make sure you're not overpowering the solution generation option generation process, because that should mainly go for the parties. And what you can do is, before you enter a round, go over the score sheet. What are the criteria on which the mediator is being judged? So if you go through the score sheet, you will understand that whether option generation or proposing solutions was at the end of the day even going to give you any points. And if you propose a solution where there was a conflict and try to solve and phrase it better or anything, then that can gain you more points, because that is the role of the mediator. So yeah.
Yeah, so adding on to that, so in a competition wherein I was the mediator, so one party was insisting that they want the ownership of the house, and the opposite party was insisting that they need a place to reside for the next 5 years. So in that situation, I propose that if you can come to an agreement wherein you can have the ownership and you can allow that party to live there for some time. And then at that moment, I thought, okay, I gave them a solution. So maybe this is going beyond my limit. But then the judge was happy with the solution and they marked me like very highly. So I was not sure if what I did as a mediator is correct or not in this situation.
I think
So
that was correct, because as you, from what I understand from what you said, that there was a point of impasse, like where the parties were not coming at a solution, or there was a, what do you say, a block, right, which the parties couldn't get through. And if you understood that there is a way to go about either staying in the house and also maintaining the ownership or whatever, and if you said that there is a way to go about this, then I think that is perfect. And it is always not necessary for the parties to come up with solution. If you identify a point and you see that this is a blockage over here, and if we twist this in a way, then definitely that works.
all right, thank you.
Yeah.
So
Option generation is
summing
normally,
up what we said, there's no hard and fast rule.
yeah, just go with the flow.
Play it by ear.
Yeah, like one more thing I wanted to add was, clients and councils, when they do the whole option generation and creation of solution process, that comes a lot of it from confidential information, which the mediators don't have. So mediators don't have that advantage. Say that whole biohazard thing, the clients may come up with such a thing, but the mediators won't have such a thing. And if you do that, then that would just be overstepping your boundaries. But if you talk about a situation of the cotton price or anything, and say about how about you give them the infrastructure and come down, lower down your cotton prices, and if there was a block over there, then that should work out. as long as you're not like creating options from confidential information that you don't have. So if you're helping a block, then that should be fine. Any other questions,
All
guys?
right.
No, right? I think we can end the session here. We've gone on for 2 hours.
Yeah.
A lot of the
Thank
people
you
have
so
left.
much for everyone who stayed back, and you guys participating really makes us feel like this is worthwhile and we're really doing something helpful. So
I wasn't expecting so much
thank you so
engagement, and
much.
it's so great to
Yeah,
see
for sure.
everybody. Yeah. Thank you. You're welcome. All right then.
Okay, see you guys tomorrow. Please do your assignments.
Bye.